Hello, friend, and welcome to Sturdy Girl, a podcast focused on strength, not size, where you'll hear conversations around healthy body image, cultivating confidence, and being a resilient human in both body and mind. Sturdy Girl is the podcast where we shift the focus away from your appearance and on to living the big, rad life you deserve. Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 13 of Sturdy Girl. We are joined by my favoriteest co-host, Megan, finally, after such the longest hiatus.
Hello.
Also, I realized in most of these episodes, I haven't been reintroducing myself. I just assume everyone knows me. I'm your host, Jess Heiss. Megan and I are going to chat about self-talk and body image. We did a little pre-chat before hitting record to go over our show notes and found some really helpful tidbits and are really excited to go over all of this with you. So self-talk, it's your internal dialogue. We don't really need to define this. We all talk to ourselves, whether it's out loud or in our heads. Self-talk is something that we do every single day. It is completely normal. But the way that we speak to ourselves is what we want to focus on here. It matters. It can be powerful in a positive or a negative way. Your thoughts become your words, become your actions, become your habits, become your beliefs. What is it? Change your thoughts, change your life.
Yes, I have heard that.
But self-talk plays an important role in how we act, how we feel, and that impacts our self-esteem. It impacts our self-confidence. It impacts our overall well-being. Our perception is our reality. And so if we are reshaping how we're thinking about something or how we're talking to ourselves, it can change our feelings on an entire situation.
I have an internal dialogue that goes on all the time, whether it's good or bad.
Sometimes we're not even aware of it, right?
Yeah.
Working with my athletes, we hear that inner critic and that inner dialogue get really loud when a situation gets difficult, when we feel stressed or when we feel overly anxious. But in this context, if you are on a really hard run, and let's say that your workout includes a whole bunch of hills, what do you start saying to yourself when it gets hard? What does that voice say when it's just starting to talk at you? Because that is when we start to notice that voice the most in those anxiety-ridden, stressful, difficult situations when we are trying something new as adults.
Yeah, it becomes the loudest.
Absolutely. One other piece of this too, because Sturdy Girl, we love to talk about body image. Self-talk, as you can rightly assume, affects body image. If we fixate on perceived flaws, our self-talk can perpetuate and impact our body image. Improving our body image, as you well know, listeners, if you have listened to any of the other episodes of Sturdy Girl, improving our body image is working on changing our thoughts about our bodies, not our physical bodies. So if we're improving self-talk, we're improving our thoughts, we can improve our body image. So while this episode isn't going to have a lot of focus on specifically body image, helping to improve our self-talk will in turn help us to improve our body image with some of these reframes. Before we dive in, let's talk about what our goal of this episode is. You Google improving self-talk and all it is positive self-talk. How to get rid of negative thoughts, how to improve positivity. And again, if you listen to other Sturdy Girl episodes, you know how we feel about talking about positive body image and positivity all the time. Self-talk, positive self-talk is the same.
You have to walk that border between becoming toxic positivity.
100%. That's exactly what I was going to say is positive self-talk. The goal isn't necessarily to reframe every negative into a positive.
Yeah.
The goal of working on our self-talk isn't to banish all negative thoughts.
And I would argue that it's almost impossible to banish all negative thoughts. So it's more about how do you deal with the negative thoughts or how do you adjust your way of thinking?
Yeah. How can you be more aware of the thoughts as they come up? How do we react to them? Understanding that we get to choose our reaction and not identify with these thoughts. That's the goal here. The goal of improving self-talk is never to completely get rid of negative thoughts and replace them with positive ones. One reminder, and it's another one of those cliche phrases, but you are not your thoughts. So often we get caught up in our thoughts and identify with them, but we are not our thoughts and we are allowed to question them. We are allowed to challenge them. We are allowed to change them.
I feel like where your growth comes from too is when you start to challenge yourself and challenge the way that you're thinking about yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this piece of improving self-talk, working on our thoughts, it's a skill. Kind of like we talked about confidence as a skill, improving our body image is a skill, managing negative thoughts is a skill.
It's all work.
Let's dive in to how we improve self-talk.
What do you think the first step is going to be? Is awareness. How to pay attention to your own self-talk. You know, you're noticing it, but you're not judging yourself on how you're talking to yourself.
Yeah. What kind of things are you saying to yourself? The first step of this is awareness. The first step of improving body image is awareness. And there's so much within psychology that starts with awareness, because we live our entire lives inside our heads. How often are we saying things to ourselves without even realizing how disparaging something is? And then when you start to pay attention, developing that awareness of just like, oh crap, did I really just say that to myself when I looked in the mirror?
Yeah.
Did I really just say that to myself when I had to like shimmy my leggings up a little harder than usual?
Or even if you're just having a normal day, you know, again, we were talking about this earlier, but I got up this morning and I'm like, my face is so broken out, and then you spiral.
And it happens just immediately.
It becomes so deep, because then it's like, again, I feel like that inner voice of like, oh, this is happening. Okay, well, heaven forbid it's hormonal. It's probably my diet. And then it's like, oh, then I've gained weight too. So let me look into that.
Full thought spiral. Absolutely.
And this all started from one pimple.
And it goes from 0 to that full on spiral in like 3.7 seconds. Yeah. One thing with this awareness piece too, you know, like I was saying earlier, this voice in our heads gets louder in difficult situations. So running those hills and hearing that voice, can you name that voice in your head when that inner critic comes up? And especially those negative thoughts, right? You don't have to like name the voice in your head that you hear all the time, but in these difficult times, it can be helpful to name them. So my athletes, like one of my clients calls her inner critic Dolores. I've called mine Betty for forever, you know, just like calling them out and be like, oh, there's Betty again. Oh, Betty, what are you saying now? Really? No, I can keep going. It's kind of going into the second thing of improving self-talk is non-judgment. So as we notice and we're gaining the awareness of these thoughts as they come up, we're not judging them. We're letting them come up. If it's those negative ones, we don't have to identify them. We can say, hey, this is Betty talking to me again. Just noticing them. Yeah.
I like that, you know, as we were talking about before, like noticing them and also being able to be okay with challenging them.
Yeah. And that's another piece of the skill where we don't want to jump right into, okay, I'm going to improve my self-talk, so I'm going to challenge every thought that comes up. It's taking the time to learn that awareness, learn that non-judgment, and then slowly starting to question those things. Do I really believe this? Is this really true? These questions though, is it judging? No, you're just asking yourself like, you know, I just told myself I was an absolute idiot because I tripped over that doorway. Am I an idiot? Do I actually believe that? Is that true? No, I was kind of clumsy, but is there another way I can look at this situation? I was texting and walking at the same time. I'm not an idiot. I just probably shouldn't multitask. And another piece of this kind of second part of challenging our thoughts, is asking yourself, what is the story that I'm telling myself? Because this can go a little bit broader. So, you know, if we're saying, do I believe this? Is it true? But it's what story? Because the story that we tell ourselves is so important. If we're developing that awareness, sometimes kind of parsing the story line versus just one line of dialogue can be hard to do, but we have the power to change the story that we're telling ourselves here. So being able to answer that question can be really helpful. And then third, can you create distance from yourself and your thoughts? So creating distance is the third thing here. Each of these kind of build on each other. So you're not going to jump in and try and create distance from yourself and your thoughts without first creating that awareness, without first working on the non-judgment piece as those thoughts
the acknowledgement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And maybe playing with a little bit of questioning, but then creating this distance. So I 100% stole this from Steve Magnus, who has written a number of awesome books. He is a mental performance coach. And so he talks about can you turn your thoughts into questions and ask why you feel this way? So similar to that, like, what story am I telling myself? But asking that question in a second or third person, maybe even using your own name, it's actually a way to help your brain kind of rise to the challenge of like, you're asking me a question, and give some distance from fully identifying as your thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. Right there. Like being able to just separate you as a person from your internal monologue.
Yeah. Again, we're not our thoughts, but how often do we get completely wrapped up in them? It creates distance from the emotional response. So, you can ask like, do you really believe this is true? Asking yourself with your name. I have played around with this a little bit because this kind of ties into when I work with athletes on mantras. We'll talk about having mantras that are helpful. So kind of along the lines of affirmations, which we'll get to. Yeah. And there's more research about using the second or third person as being more powerful because it almost, if you say it to yourself in that second or third person, you're more likely to respond. Your body physiologically is more likely to respond than using I.
That's so interesting. Like I really wonder if it's just because you are kind of taking yourself out of the equation and looking at it from an outside perspective.
It's broadening your worldview in that context in your little internal world. But with this, it gives you a chance to respond instead of react because we all have that choice as those thoughts come up. And it's one of those that there's space between the thought that comes up and your response or reaction. Can you pause, breathe? Am I questioning this? Am I challenging it? Am I just letting it go? You have the choice there to decide how you want to respond.
And I love that you mentioned that you can just acknowledge things and let them go. Like you don't have to.
I mean, how exhausting. How exhausting mentally would it be to challenge every thought that comes up? This is more in context, like the challenging piece and asking like, do I believe the story that I'm telling myself? This is for some of those negative thoughts that you find come up continually. It's when I look in the mirror, when I'm in certain situations, when I'm out socially and I'm around new people, what am I saying to myself? When I walk into a room of people I don't know, like these kinds of situations, it's not just like while you're sitting during the day and doing your work and you're like, do I believe this? Is this really true?
Oh, that would be exhausting.
Yeah. Like, sorry, I'm just having an internal like fight with my own brain. I'm fighting with Betty right now. I'm busy. Me and Betty.
I can't work right now. I need to have this conversation with myself.
I need to argue with myself. So, fourth thing on working on self-talk is the friend test. If you've listened to other episodes of Sturdy Girl, you have heard of the friend test. Hopefully you're not tired of hearing this.
But it's so important.
Because when you start paying attention to your thoughts, would you say these kinds of things to your friends? If you notice,
no.
If you notice a friend saying those kinds of things to themselves, what would you say to them? So this goes back to that self-compassion piece that we talk about so often. If you did notice a friend making absolutely shitty, disparaging remarks about their bodies when looking in the mirror, what would you say? Because oftentimes the things that you would say to that person that you love and care about is what you should be saying to yourself. Because treating ourselves, like we talk about treating our bodies with respect, we have to treat our brains with respect too. So the things that we say to ourselves matter. So being self-compassionate and kind. And that's something that this is kind of a side tangent for a second. But when I was running marathons back to back to back to back, which is a whole nother story, oftentimes my self-talk was really negative. And it was really like the, go hard or go home, grind, push hard, and just pushing myself consistently. And I remember reading about self-compassion and changing perspective on what you say to yourself to be able to do hard things. And it was like, choose something nice to say. And now this translated well with running. This doesn't translate as well with lifting necessarily. But instead of telling myself to like suck it up and all of those things, I started saying, "You've got this, baby girl," which sounds absolutely soft and so ridiculous. And there was somehow that it was like, "Oh yeah, friend, you've got this." And it was so helpful in getting through so many of my training runs. And it's so interesting that when we talk about this friend test and we talk about talking to ourselves the way we talk to other people, we roll our eyes and we're like, yeah, I know whatever, we've heard it before. But have you tried it? Have you tried it consistently? Have you tried catching yourself and be like, oh shit, I wouldn't say that to one of my friends. I'd call my friend out if they were saying that to themselves in front of me.
You wouldn't let your friends talk bad about themselves. You shouldn't talk bad about yourself.
And like to take this one step further, would we stay in a toxic relationship with someone who always spoke down to us, called us names, mentally, verbally abused us, used guilt to force us into eating certain foods or moving our bodies more? No.
No.
So why do we talk to ourselves this way? Why do we have this like consistently toxic relationship thinking that pushing ourselves in this negative light is going to help us do better?
The way that you were talking to yourself during running, it's like taking that really negative, shitty, like you're not doing good enough and turning that into like a really positive, like you've got this, friend. And it kind of like, even if it's silly, it to me would kind of like put you in that mood where you're just kind of like, ah, ha, ha, that's like kind of funny.
Yeah. Give it something kind, which sometimes our brains are, like trying to beat ourselves up and you're like, actually, like you don't have to be doing this, but you're doing this. And yes, it's hard, but you're out here doing this thing. So good job. Keep going.
Honestly, that's how I try to look at everything. It's just like one step at a time. Just got to get to the next one and then I'll figure it out. That's how I run. I'm like, I just got to get like 1/4 of a mile.
So the friend test, guys, that's so important. But actually try it. Don't roll your eyes and be like, oh, I've heard this so many times. Okay, the 5th thing for improving self-talk. Can you change your perspective in the moment? Now, we've talked about changing perspective as far as challenging our thoughts, gaining some emotional distance, all of those pieces. But this is more in the context of if you are already in that thought spiral, if your thoughts are already overwhelming, can you write it out? Can you get a journal out? Get your phone out and put it in the notes app if it's like late at night and you're in bed or something. Is it something that you can talk to a trusted human? Can you take a walk? Can you ask yourself if there is actually another perspective? Just questioning is going to give yourself a little bit more perspective.
100%. And I feel like there's been things recently where I've just kind of, you let your mind spiral and you're in this bubble of just negative self-talk, and then being able to just kind of say those things out loud to someone that cares about you and is going to give you good intentional feedback. But just being able to kind of just say it, I think, can help sometimes.
When we can talk about whatever it is that's bothering us, or like talk about those thoughts that are coming up, the second that you bring it out into the world, it immediately gets smaller and less important and less crazy or scary.
And it takes just that weight off, even if you're talking to yourself negatively about, your own image or something like this, there's something that you've kind of spiraled out in your head, being able to just kind of say that out loud. Okay, I've let that weight off my chest, at least, of the way that I've been thinking.
Yeah. I love to journal. I've journaled since 5th grade. I have an entire Rubbermaid tote of Spider Bound notebooks. For me, writing things out is the best perspective shift that I can find, because it helps to kind of, let's say you're having these thoughts about your body. I don't know. And I want to figure out why I'm feeling that way. It can be really helpful to sit down and be like, I feel so bloated and gross and fat. And I looked in the mirror and I just can't believe I've gotten bigger. I've whatever. And you start writing this out. You're like, well, when did I notice that about my body? Well, I kind of noticed like 2 weeks ago, and you start to be able to pull the thread and kind of unravel where it may have started. And we don't always get the answer. Like, that's not the point, but to be able to start writing it out and working it out. And for me, then it's like, oh, well, I had this change in my life and there's been higher stress, and you can unravel that thread of like, oh, holy crap. You know what? I've been eating more ice cream, and ice cream always makes me feel bloated, or whatever it is. And then suddenly
you're explaining my November.
But it's just that piece of like, if I sit down, I'm like, I'm so frustrated with this thing, and I start writing out, well, what am I struggling with? Okay, it's this. I'm feeling this way. This thought keeps coming up. I'm not enough, or I'm not this, or whatever it is. And being able to write it out, it lessens it. You're able to kind of take it out, take a look at it, what shape, color, size it is. And it's the same thing with being able to talk to someone about it. Suddenly, it's not so big and scary. You maybe have another perspective. If you talk it out with someone and they're like, Jessica, it's really not so bad.
You're okay.
Or you're feeling this way, but have you thought about where this came from? Right? You can gain perspective on a situation. Okay, we got a little woo. We'll get a little more woo. So number 6, practice gratitude.
Yeah.
Now, hear me out. It does sound a little woo. We've all heard this before, very similar to kind of the friend test thing, right? Gratitude lists, thinking about the things we're grateful or thankful for, can be helpful in that mindset reframe. there are always things that we can appreciate about our being. There are always things we can appreciate about our bodies, about our lives. There's power in our bodies, no matter our ability. And this isn't necessarily saying that we should reframe and think of all the things we appreciate about our physical bodies. But can we practice gratitude for the ability to ride bikes in the mud? Can we appreciate the ability to jump on the trampoline with our nieces for hours?
In my own personal experience, whenever I think of practicing gratitude, even if it is something, let's say that I'm feeling really negative about my outside appearance, a lot of times when I find the things that I practice gratitude on, they're much bigger than that. I'm thankful that I can
You're not thankful for
ride my bike on the weekend.
I was going to say, you're not thankful for your really long eyelashes or something like that, right?
No, I think that for me, trying to find some of those deeper emotional things, and this is totally per person, I think, but just that is the way that I have found that practicing gratitude works.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong here. You can find whatever it is to practice gratitude, but it's giving yourself that change of perspective of saying there are things in my life that are good and that I'm thankful for. There are things about my being. If our thoughts that are coming up are about our bodies, we can turn it to what we're grateful for that our bodies can do for us. And there's nothing wrong with that in working towards improving our self-talk, because if we are able to kind of reframe in a way and shift, it can be really helpful. Which I guess I already kind of went into the 7th point of improving self-talk, and that's reframe. If we've practiced the skill enough around awareness, around non-judgment, around even the questioning and challenging, we can start looking at practicing reframing our self-talk. So where we talked about, you don't have to change your self-talk. You can acknowledge, you can let it go, you can decide not to identify with your thoughts. This step is purely optional, but it's one of those, like, if you have gained skill around that awareness of even just the questioning of, do I believe this? What story am I telling myself? Do our brains think unhelpful things? Sometimes a lot.
Yeah.
It can be helpful to reframe them. So if our self-talk is negative about our bodies, it can be unhelpful to use positive affirmations that we don't actually believe. So this is looking at a reframe of what are some good or neutral things. If I look in the mirror and I don't like my stomach, or I see the zits on my face, or whatever it is, we can't go from picking apart the cellulite that we see on our stomach to looking in the mirror and being like, God damn, I am a gorgeous bitch. It just doesn't work that way.
At least it's not overnight.
It's finding a level of affirmation, which again, we talked gratitude, we've talked friend test, those things like a little bit woo. Affirmations can feel a little bit woo. And there's really mixed research on the benefit of affirmations, but part of it is finding affirmations that we believe to some degree. So you can't go from that picking apart the fat rolls, berating yourself, to feeling like a gorgeous bitch. So it's finding somewhere in the middle where it's maybe going back to that gratitude and saying, I really appreciate how strong my legs are and the fact that I have built so much muscle in my quads from powerlifting for the last 3 years. And you believe that because you are proud of it and you recognize the work that you put in. Is it recognizing the strength in your arms from carrying your children around, or recognizing, like, I always make sure that I carry my groceries in one trip, no matter what. That takes strength. But looking at that piece of reframing, can we challenge the thoughts that come up? Can we find affirmations that help to redirect and bring some positivity, right? So we're not always trying to be positive, but if we've put ourselves in that negative thought spiral or a shame spiral or whatever it is, are there ways to reframe that, to come out of it and find things that we appreciate about ourselves, our beings? Is it the gratitude piece? Is it challenging those thoughts to say, do I believe this? Is this true? Right? This kind of ties this all together as a big, giant reframe.
I love it. I loved the way that it is broken down too. Like,
they build on each
levels.
Other. Yeah, absolutely. The goal isn't to get all the way to the point that we're able to, I see this thought, I change it now. Like,
right,
that's not it.
No.
And I will say personally, for me, I haven't gotten to the point where I'm completely changing these thoughts. A lot of times for me, it's just developing that awareness of, oh, this is what I thought. This is what I'm thinking. Okay. I actually don't really believe that. Okay. I can let it go.
I kind of side with that as well. Sometimes I call it talking myself off a ledge.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't need to be 100% positive. I just need to talk myself
It's not just
recognize my own thoughts and be like, all right, you're doing good.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows all the time.
It doesn't need to be.
No. And so just to wrap this up, one last piece, and I just call this a bonus just because this talks about kind of more of those affirmations. One way that we can utilize affirmations within our self-talk for improving our lives is to reflect on our core values. When we are working on what kind of affirmations we want to look at what we have chosen to live by. What are our core values? And if we can continue to act and think in accordance with those core values, live in integrity, we have much better outcomes. You see, people are able to kind of move beyond the threats, if you will, of those negative thoughts that come up and show improved self-confidence. So core values, if you haven't listened to our episode on living a values-driven life, this is a shameless plug to go back and learn about your core values. There is actually a download on the Sturdy Girl website as well for kind of picking and choosing your core values. And the whole episode goes through step by step on how to break it down and narrow it down to your top 3 to 5. Megan, did you have anything else to add on self-talk?
I think that just to reiterate for myself, it's not about making everything positive. It's just, and that is my, I always try and take that away because you don't need to be all rainbows. It's okay. Like you can listen to yourself and say, all right, that is not a true reflection of who I am or how I actually feel, and just let it go. Easier said than done sometimes.
I was going to say, please don't start singing the Frozen song. Quick recap for improving self-talk. Developing awareness. I feel like we have just beat a dead horse at this point. Non-judgment. So as we develop the awareness of those thoughts, it's practicing that non-judgment and learning how to just let the thoughts come up and let them go, knowing that we are not our thoughts. Yeah. We don't have to identify them. And then looking at, can we create distance from our thoughts? Can we ask ourselves those questions in second or third person? Do you believe this? What story am I telling myself? And being able to separate our emotions from our thoughts and be able to create that emotional distance. And then our beloved friend test. Don't stay in a toxic relationship, shifting perspective. So that journaling, walk it out, talk it out, asking yourself if there is another perspective to the thoughts that you're having, practicing gratitude, and then reframing. So reframing again falls into all of these, but looking at that piece of affirmations and finding ones that you believe about yourself or some I believe to start practicing. And one little side note on affirmations is that you can practice this and find those ways to pick things that you actually believe, right? I'm proud of my strong legs. I like my ability to make someone feel at ease in any conversation. I like my ability to walk into a room and introduce myself and feel comfortable. Finding those pieces and affirmations. So if you go on social media and you go into self-talk, a lot of those will be like, write affirmations on your mirror. Seeing them can be helpful. So if you find ones that you resonate with, consider writing them out. They can be helpful. It's just don't create cognitive dissonance with like looking at yourself in the mirror, picking apart all your cellulite and then turning on and writing on a sticky note like you are a gorgeous bitch and expecting yourself to get any positive result from that.
I do know people that has worked really well.
Yeah. And that again,
and it is things that they believe,
that personal, it comes down to a personal level. Yeah. You have to believe it. But that's that self-talk. So friends, keep talking to yourselves. Think about how you talk to yourselves. And Megan and I will catch you next week, next Wednesday. Talk to you soon. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please feel free to follow, subscribe, like, whatever the heck you do with podcasts. As always, stay sturdy, friends, and we'll talk to you next week.